One feature of IIMB across the years has been its ability to adapt to changes. Yeah, I think if you look at the evolution of IIMB, there have been some important milestones. At that time, it was started with a public sector focus. Somewhere in the late 90s, we realized that the software industry is about to take off. And Bangalore was the sort of home of the software industry. And a lot of the software companies were very keen to get a group of good managers who could basically spearhead the whole growth activity. So we started a program at that time. This was in 1998 in collaboration with some of the top software companies. In fact, all these pillars which we are seeing here are apparently inspired by that. There is a sort of a hall in Madurai Meenakshi Temple which has all these pillars, and the other one was Fatehpur Sikri.
So why don't we dive right in, sir? Why don't you tell us what are the highlights of IIMB?
Yeah, I think if you look at the evolution of IIMB, there have been some important milestones. So if you go back to 73 when the institute was started, at that time it was started with a public sector focus. Reason was very obvious. At that time, public sector was seen as the driver of the economy.
Right.
So obviously a new management institute which started at that time needed to be associated with the public sector.
Right.
But if you fast forward a little bit, by the time you come to the 1980s or so, that dependence or that priority for the public sector started declining. So reflecting that, the institute also slowly started becoming more, if you like, corporate oriented, more general management oriented. And that orientation got strengthened further once liberalization process started in the early 90s. So that was a kind of, if you like, the first phase of IIMB. We also realized somewhere in the mid 90s that with all this internationalization happening, institute also needs to slowly internationalize. So we started doing more international programs. We started collaborating with business schools abroad. We started looking at enhancing our research activities. So a lot of steps to become more internationally relevant happened at that time. One feature of IIMB across the years has been its ability to adapt to changes externally. So one change I already spoke about. The other change is, or the second one actually, is that somewhere in the late 90s, we realized that the software industry is about to take off. And Bangalore was the sort of home of the software industry. And a lot of the software companies were very keen to get a group of good managers who could basically spearhead the whole growth activity. So we started a program at that time. This was in 1998 in collaboration with some of the top software companies to help transform a lot of the project leaders and project managers into businessmen. And that program today has become a really significant weekend MBA program, which started way back in 98. Similarly, in the early 2000s, we realized that while the government's role had changed, the government was still very important. And the government also realized that it needed its bureaucracy to have a new skill set. So the government was keen that, some of the institutes in India should start long-term programs to train the bureaucrats so that they could lead a modern open economy. So we started a public policy and management program in the early 2000s, reflecting this need. We were also quite farsighted in another respect. Around 2000, we also started our entrepreneurship center. This is a time when, entrepreneurship and incubation were not, commonly talked about as they're talked about today. But we realized that this could be an area where IIMB could make a difference. Luckily, at that time, Mr. N.S. Raghavan, who was one of the co-founders of Infosys, he was retiring from Infosys and he was very keen to connect with some such activity. So he became the benefactor of that particular entrepreneurship center, which is today called the N.S. Raghavan Center for Entrepreneurial Learning. So it's that early start that we had in entrepreneurship and incubation, which enabled us to grow very rapidly when when entrepreneurship took off in India, right? When 2014-15, when entrepreneurship took off, we already had a good foundation in place and we could just ride that wave. So, so again, another important landmark in that respect was online education. So we realized somewhere around 2013-14, one of my predecessors, Professor Vachani, he realized that, look, a lot of education is going to shift online. So IIMB also has to be a leader in the online education space. So he came from the US. He had been a professor at Boston. So when he came, he took it as his mission that he's going to set up a really good online education capability in IIMB. And that's when we set up our MOOC studio. We started producing content which is used on the edX platform. And today we have more than 60 courses which are running on edX. Not only that, we have now curated a lot of that content and we are offering longer duration programs. For example, last year we started a program in hospital management, which is being subscribed to by a lot of doctors, radiologists, administrators. And we started another program on AI for managers, which several leading companies are
taking it up as well.
So I think the core message, if you like, is really that IIMB has been quite good at understanding how the environment is changing and then creating the right academic programs and offerings which will serve that particular emerging need.
Understood. So let's talk a little bit about you covered a big timeline. Let's try to understand from the logo and the brand, which is typically how most people understand. The saying, I think, is Tejasvi Navaditamastu. That and the logo. Do you want to shed some light about how that was conceptualized and does that, how does it fit into this picture?
Yeah, so interestingly, this is not the first logo of the institute. The original logo of the institute was actually a book.
Okay.
An open book actually.
Okay.
But this logo, I'm not sure exactly when it came, but somewhere in the early 90s. And this logo basically, I think it's really talking about light and radiance. And as you know, Tejasvi Navaditamastu basically says that let us, illuminate everything or let light be a part of everything that we do. Let it be bright and radiant and so on. So essentially, it's really talking about how education needs to be very lively. It needs to be infused with a lot of energy. And we need to spread that, all over. So it's basically spreading the good karma or the good knowledge and all that we have with everyone around. I think that's the sort of philosophy behind it.
Interesting. That's actually another nice dimension to it. Now let's move to the architecture. I think it has its own story. We had Mr. B.V. Doshi design this. You want to shed a little bit about the thought process behind it and how it was
of course,
done?
I wasn't here at that time, but I think Mr. Doshi was quite a creative thinker. So he looked for 2 or 3 things. One thing he was very clear is there should be a lot of space and light and, very kind of open feeling to the campus. He felt that was very important when you are doing a lot of knowledge creation and education and all that. So that's one thing. Second thing he felt was that the building and architecture should mesh in quite well with the local environment. So he was quite keen that we should use local building materials and not some imported kind of stuff.
Interesting.
And the third thing is he wanted to bring in something from the heritage of India. So in fact, 2 very disparate sort of areas or 2 disparate sites from which he apparently got inspiration. One was the Madurai Meenakshi temple. In fact, all these pillars which we are seeing here are apparently inspired by that. There is a sort of a hall in Madurai Meenakshi temple which has all these pillars. And the other one was Fatehpur Sikri. So one in the south and one in the north.
Very nice.
And so these were, he has publicly acknowledged these 2 architectural sites as major inspirations for his design of this campus. But the philosophy was all about this openness, light, feeling of space. You shouldn't feel very claustrophobic. You shouldn't feel you're kind of hemmed into a room. I mean, those kind of things were some of the ideas which were behind his architecture.
Right. So moving on, why don't we talk a little bit about how you as a director drive the brand as well? How does your day look like? What does a day in your life look like?
Yeah. So I think the day is not very standard. Some days, of course, I teach, though not as much as I should, but I do teach. I, of course, also try to continue in whatever small way I can my research activities. But typical day, I think a lot of it is actually quite externally oriented. I'm on several boards. I'm involved with some NGOs. I'm involved with a lot of other academic institutions in advisory board capacity. So just to give you a sense, for example, this morning, I attended 3 board meetings.
Wow.
Okay. One was of an educational institution. one was of a company,
Okay.
and yeah, the third was also a company. So 2 companies and 1 educational institution. I actually attended some board related activity this morning. So that does take up a lot of my time, but a lot of my other time, of course, is in, of course, managing the institute, looking at what are the new things that are happening, what should we be sort of putting our focus on, things like that. I mean, yeah.
As a follow-on, what is the next, I don't know, in the next 5 years, what are the 3 big things IIMB is focusing on? Where do you all want to make foray into?
So, see, I think there are the one very obvious area is online and digital education, because we've already created quite a good foundation there. So the idea is, how do we take that forward? So one very strong sense we have is that we need to find a way in which we can take our education to people who it is not reaching now, but who need it very badly. So I told you earlier about this hospital management program we started.
Right.
That's a good example.
Right.
Healthcare sector is critical to India. And it really needs good managerial inputs. But the traditional program offerings that we have are not very suitable to doctors and medical professionals, because they can't leave their hospital and come and spend days here, right?
Yeah.
So that's why the online format works extremely well, because it's online asynchronous. So it's very flexible. They can attend when they have the time. So this hospital management program was a sort of prototype or an experiment, if you like. And what we are hoping is we can now replicate this philosophy in other sectors. One sector we are looking at very actively is the entire MSME sector. MSMEs, as you all know, I mean, they're basically, they provide employment.
Correct.
They're also a very important engine for the growth of the economy.
Correct.
But many of them are facing serious challenges because of all the changes that are happening around us. So what we are hoping is that just like we created this program for the hospital managers, can we create something for MSMEs that help them upgrade their skills and capabilities? It should also be affordable. It should also be flexible so that they can attend it when they have the time. So this is one thing we are looking at very, very closely. The second thing we want to do is we want to be in undergrad education. Now, IIMB historically has been a graduate school. We have offered MBA and MBA type programs. But if you look at India today, India has a very young demographic. We have literally thousands of students who are going to college and they are looking for good college opportunities. Because they are not getting those opportunities, they are going abroad. And you can just see the numbers, right? The number of students who are going to Europe or Australia or Canada to study. Now, why are they all going there? One of the reasons they're going there is they are not finding what they want here. Or maybe even if there are good programs, the number of seats available is small and they're not able to get entry. So some years ago, we discussed this internally and we felt it's time IIMB also has a presence in undergrad education. So it's a very big endeavor. It's also quite different from what we've been doing before. But it's something we are quite keen to do. Fortunately, the government of Karnataka gave us another piece of land, which is about 25 kilometers south of the present campus near Anekal. So we are hoping to develop that into the new campus where we will offer undergrad program. That will be also quite in line with the new education policy, because the education policy wants institutions to be multidisciplinary. They want institutions to offer programs at multiple levels. So we think this will be our way of also contributing to the objectives of the policy, and at the same time in line with what we are trying to do in the institute. That's the second thing. The third one we are looking at is a bit in a way related to the first one, which is we are saying, just like we are offering this online education to the sectors which are undermanaged or need a lot of inputs, can we also use online education for undergrad education? So that's something we are looking, and we want to take a niche position there. So we are looking at digital business and entrepreneurship as a good arena for us to offer undergrad program completely online. It also ties in very well with our strengths in entrepreneurship, which we have developed over time. So we are very actively looking at that. In fact, we have the curriculum ready and we are now looking at the mechanics of actually making this happen. So these are three big initiatives which we are looking at for the future.
Interesting. So why don't we extend it a little bit more, right?
Sure.
So you've given me a very broad
Yeah.
canvas, but what does it take for India to set up a Ivy League-like system, right? Do you think the NEP is doing that? Do you think there are other things that has to be fixed, cultural, societal, economic? I'd like to hear your thoughts about how we create that reverse, or rather stem the brain drain, for the lack of a better.
So I think we have done it in a small scale. If you look at the IITs, or for that matter, you look at the IIMs, we have created good institutions. I would say, for example, on teaching, what we do in a place like IIM is comparable to the best in the world. Our research also is very good. It's not quite reached the level of the top institutions, but we are trying to move in that direction. So I think the directionality is correct.
That's right.
What I think we are a bit challenged by is how do we do quality and scale at the same time.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
that I think is still a work in progress.
Right.
The good news is in the IITs now they've done it to some degree. When I studied as an undergrad student in IIT Kanpur, there were less than 2,000 students. Today, all the older IITs have something like 10,000 students. So
Right.
they've
Yeah.
seem to have been able to scale up.
Right.
Only time will tell whether they've been able to preserve the quality as well. But I think they've
Right.
made a good effort.
Right.
So I think this is going to be our challenge, and there's associated challenges, of course. One is getting good faculty. Now, obviously, if you want to scale up to that level, you're going to need a lot of good faculty. And at present, at least, the supply of faculty is not as strong as it should be. You're also going to need a lot of resources.
Right.
You want to expand capacity, for example, if we need to build a new campus, that's going to cost a lot of money. So we have to figure out where that money will come from. When all the IITs and IIMs were started, the money came from the government, but the government today has a lot of other pressing demands on its resources. So maybe they won't be able to share so much money for some of these things. So we'll have to reach out to philanthropy, CSR,
Alumni.
maybe alumni, whole lot of other people to participate in this whole process of funding the infrastructure that's required. So it's basically good faculty, it's infrastructure. These are all going to be some of the things that we really need to create. And then, of course, we also have to come up with a lot of creative curriculum. We'll have to drive high quality research, because that's the currency in global academia. So, there's a lot of things to do.
Got it. So there's a long way then in that sense. So let's talk a little bit about some of the other interesting things that we have been doing. A couple of IITs, I think IIT Delhi opened up a overseas campus. Is that something that IIMB is also looking? I know you're looking more here, but what is that? What is the thought about that in that space?
My view on that is a little different. The reason for this is in management. If you want to access international students, you may not necessarily need a physical presence. Okay.
Whole digital.
So today, we already on the edX platform where we have our MOOCs courses running. We recently signed up our 2 millionth learner. Okay. So over the last approximately 10 years, we've had about 2 million people who signed up. And this is from more than 150 countries.
Wow.
Okay. So while of course it's true that not everybody who signs up completes the course. So to that extent, it's not as though 2 million people have completed the course, but still, we are able to reach out to learners all over the world on our MOOCs platform. So I'm just wondering, as a result of that, do we really need to be physically present? Yeah, maybe we need to supplement it a little bit, but for that, maybe I don't need to set up a physical campus. Maybe I do a lot of stuff online, and then I want to have a connect with the learners. Maybe I go there and temporarily, just take a conference hall or something or a classroom and connect with them. So that's our thinking at this point of time. It could change, but the current thinking is that we will use online and digital and as the primary way of reaching out to students and learners internationally. Of course, we would love to have more international students coming here. We currently get about 60 to 70 international exchange students every year, largely from Europe. We would like that number to go up. We would also like to be able to attract international students from other countries. We are already making some efforts in some of the neighboring countries to see if we can get some of their best students to come and be a part of our institute.
Such an interesting point. So how has that changed? This whole, as India grows in the global stage, how has how has the interest towards IIMB changed? Do you see more applications? Do you have better response when you reach out? How is that
talking about in India?
In India, or no, from abroad. When IIMB as a whole is presented abroad because of the whole India story.
Well, internationally, to be honest, we don't get a very huge number of applications. It's a modest number. I think the best MBA students have a lot of options all over the world. And let's face one thing, MBA education is quite closely linked to employment. So somebody who's spending a lot of money on an MBA program, he or she also wants to go to a place where he or she will get a job which will not only pay back what you spent, but also give you a good ROI, right? So I think there are a few challenges in India, though our cost of education is lower, but at the same time, international students don't really look at the Indian job market as the place maybe they want to be. Maybe that will change. I mean, it could change if a lot of the economic activities we are doing now take off. That could change. But that's one of the reasons I think we don't get so many international applicants.
Let's talk a little bit about your book, because I think a lot of the questions that we speak about or spoke about is how to solve these problems at that scale, the jugaad to innovation. Do you want to tell me what you felt were like 2-3 things that you think India should do, focus really well? I know you've said this, but I'd like to hear it again in terms of how we should approach this problem of scale and quality.
So I think one challenge we have always faced in India is that we are quite good at improvisation. So if there's a problem, there's limited resources, we are very clever and, we will find a solution of that problem in some way or the other. But one of the challenges is that many of the traditional solutions were not very scalable and sometimes they were not very robust. But today, people have realized that you can have affordable solutions that are also robust and high quality. So the typical consumer today, he or she is not willing to settle for anything inferior. And I think the turning point for this was actually the mobile phone. If you remember, those early Nokia handsets we all used to use, which have very little functionality. I mean, it's not like a smartphone. You could just make a call, maybe send a text message.
Correct.
But extremely reliable. Very simple to use. In 10 minutes, you can figure out how to use the phone. You drop the phone, nothing will happen. Pick it up, it will work fine. So people realize that there is really no reason why, just because something is affordable, it should be poor quality. It can be good quality, it could be user-friendly, and it could also be reasonably priced. So I think that's the challenge for India. The challenge for India is how do you do innovation which solves India's problems, many of which are scale-oriented. But the solution has to be intuitive, it has to be user-friendly, it has to be something that people relate to. That's extremely important. Otherwise, I think consumers say, no, this is not it. And whenever people are able to come up with a solution like that, everybody is happy to use it. I mean, so, on another, if you look at the way people have gone in for digital solutions, whether it be payments or whether it be anything else, that just shows, people are not scared of technology. They're quite willing to adopt technology if it's useful to them, if it's affordable, if it makes sense to them.
I think now you brought out that point. You're on the board of NPCI. So you've had a pretty much a ringside view to how that has taken off. What are lessons that you think, management lessons does NPCI have in your opinion, that you think India should sort of apply
of course, if you look at something like the success of UPI, this is not something that happened overnight. I think the whole idea, the conceptualization, this whole idea that you should have an open system which is operator independent, you can have different players plugging into it through open APIs. This philosophy is something I think which has taken root quite well in India. In a way, Aadhaar was the sort of starting point for that. But building on that, this general philosophy of digital public infrastructure is something that's really taken root. I think that's the core of it. I think there were some advantages of the way we do things in India. I think one of them, of course, is we have a strong network of public sector banks. So they are, since they're part of the overall policy framework, it's relatively easy to put something in place. We have private sector banks that are very forward looking and they also want to have a good customer connect. And of course, we've seen a lot of good fintech players. We have seen players like, all the big names that you see around you who have also embraced something like UPI in a big way and have in a way ensured or enabled that the technology kind of gets used in a big way. So I think all of these are reasons why something like UPI is taken off. But more than anything else, I think a lot of it is about convenience. It's just the simplicity, it's the convenience, it's the interoperability, it's how your bank, which bank you have an account in doesn't matter, which phone you have doesn't matter. I mean, that has really made things really easy. And it's just so simple, you just, there's a QR code and you just sort of scan it and you're, that's it.
I think you're right. In many ways, I think what you sort of say, if I may add, is how it is suited for our conditions.
Sure.
We can't just sort of...
Yeah, because when you see, for example, even a vegetable or fruit vendor being able to use it so easily, a lot of that is because it's just so simple, right? You can just, you see all those pictures, right? We just have that QR code thing with a small stand and, you are up and running. So it's really doesn't really make any, it's not a big challenge for people to adopt it.
Understood. Got it. Do you want to talk a little bit about the lesser known courses? Because everyone, IIM comes in the news like we were earlier talking about, is when you have the placements and when you have, let's say, the admissions or the cutoff for it. Let's say those are the broad strokes. I'm sure there are other news items. But do you want to talk about the courses? Like, for example, I was surprised that there's a public policy course.
So the public policy program, as I mentioned, was started about 20 years ago. The objective was very simple. We wanted to be able to help people from the government also learn all the best practices in management and also learn about the various policy aspects, given that policy making across the globe has changed quite a bit in the last few decades. So it's largely attended by people from the government, though we have a few non-government people as well. People who attended that program have gone into major policy positions in the government, including at the secretary level at the Government of India. And whatever feedback we have got is that it was extremely useful to them in helping them make significant policy contributions. We also, as I mentioned, have a weekend MBA program. It's called PGP-EM. That's the program which started with a focus on the software industry, but now it's open to other industries as well. That's also been very helpful to particularly companies in Bangalore who needed to develop their managerial pipeline for the future. We also have a 1-year full-time executive MBA program. This is meant for people who have more experience. Typically, people have about 5 to 10 years experience working in large companies. And they are making a career transition. They are moving from their traditional, maybe a more technical role now to a managerial role. That's also been around now for about 15 years. That program is also doing quite well. So these are some of the other big programs. We also have a lot of interesting programs we do in the entrepreneurship space. So I should just spend a couple of minutes talking about them. We are the partner to Goldman Sachs for their 10,000 Women Entrepreneurs Global Initiative. So what we do as part of that is we work with a group of high potential women entrepreneurs who are already running successful businesses. And the idea is to help them take those businesses to the next level. Similarly, we also have an early stage women startup program, which we do with support from Kotak Mahindra Bank, which identifies women who are at a much earlier stage. They just had an idea. Maybe they just set up their company. And once again, we build entrepreneurial capability. So, I mean, in a way, all our activities in some way or the other are focused on building the capabilities of managers, entrepreneurs and leaders and across domains, whether it be business, government, or the broader social space.
So interesting. So I'm just curious to ask, how much of this nimbleness that you said, adapting to change, has come because we are in Bangalore? How much of the city has influenced the thought process here?
I don't know exactly how much it's influenced, but I'm sure we could not have escaped the influence of the city. Certainly, it's the vibrancy and the energy and all that. I think the part of the institute which has benefited the most from that is the Entrepreneurship Center, because that's where, this connect with Bangalore really makes a big difference. It's also had some difference in the weekend MBA program I mentioned, because that attracts people from the software and IT industry. We've also been lucky, we've had a lot of people from the software and IT industry teaching classes here, supporting us, like Mr. Raghavan gave us the endowment for the Entrepreneurship Center. Many of those things happened because of our location. We've had very prominent people from Bangalore on our board as well. Kiran Majumdar was our earlier chair. Dr. Devi Shetty is our current chair of our board. So these are people who have, they are very much part of the entrepreneurial success story of Bangalore, and they've been closely associated with the institute.
Very good, sir. Last question, sir. One of the big changes that are happening now is with machine learning and AI.
Sure.
How do you see that impacting IIMB or management in general?
I think it's a bit early to say. So I talk a lot to people in the industry. So if I look at the immediate impact of AI and ML, it's largely been on the efficiency side. See, if you look at the history of industrial activity, it's always been propelled by the focus on improving productivity. Whether you look at the industrial revolution, you create a machine, it improves productivity. You put power into the machine, it improves productivity further. All the technological developments we saw in the 20th century were all driving productivity. AI and ML in one way is the latest frontier of that. Okay. So that's one part of the story. The second part where I think the jury is still out is a lot of the things we are talking about today, like your generative AI. Can AI actually substitute for the human thought process? I think that part of AI ML is we still don't know whether that's really going to happen or not. What we are doing internally, of course, is we make sure that we have good exposure to these topics in our curriculum. We have a course called Managing Digital Business in the first year of our MBA, where these ideas are all talked about. We also have elective courses focused on AI and ML and how they are changing business. So we are, of course, making sure that our students are familiar with these ideas before they leave the institute. But how exactly this will change business as a whole, I think at this point of time, the jury is out. The immediate, very visible application is in terms of efficiency improvement and productivity enhancement.
Professor Rishi, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you for talking to YourStory.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thank you.